How's it going, guys? I'm Chris, and this is Regular Guy Training, and you're just going to have to deal with that because I can't escape the wet shit falling from the sky. So, let's go ahead and talk about this, right? A while back, full disclosure, Men2 sent a few of their magazines to me. They asked me to do a review on them, and in true this channel type fashion, I told them, yeah, sure, I'll review them. Just understand I'm not pulling any punches. And they were like, okay. So, no big deal. So they sent a couple of AR mags out, and then they sent a couple of handgun magazines out. And very shortly after I got them, I noticed a couple of issues straight out the box. And I sent you guys little footage saying, yeah, it's a terrific start, isn't it? Funny thing is, I got a message from the guy that contacted me at Men2, and they immediately sent out brand new, fresh off the line AR magazines because they had like very, very early generation stuff, and then they had slightly improved stuff based off of that. So they sent the new magazines out immediately, and I was like, okay. I continued to review all of them, right? So I'm going to start with the AR magazines. I'm going to come straight out and say I don't really like them. I don't. But I don't have a lot of reasons to not like them. Because the bottom line is this. Although a while back we showed you guys like slow follower after we pull a round out manually. Once we stuck them in rifles and got them at cycling speeds, they actually fed. And they fed fine. Since I started testing them, since that video, I don't know however many months back, they've continued to feed just fine. Okay? And they've been fed a lot of bullets. They do okay. Every single time that one would go in a gun, it would feed the rifle. Okay, cool. Now here's why I don't like them. There's just things that give you pause when you start farting around with a magazine. Like, for instance, these guys, particularly when they're full of bullets, they tend to stick a lot in AR magazine wells. And the thing about them is that I'm not sure it's going to do this empty, but there it is. Right when it meets that magazine latch, it really stiffens up. Okay? Now, all magazines relatively, they do this, right? So I'm going to press on the Norgon Ambi catch here, and I'm just going to go ahead and do the same thing, and it snags a little bit. Like, you can feel it really kind of rubbing in there. So on the way out, the problem that a lot of them have, especially when you're doing like top-offs, that kind of thing, is that they tend to not want to drop all the way free. Empty, not as big of an issue, but a lot of times they'll do exactly this right here, and they'll stick, right? Versus a lot of other freaking magazines that I have, empties, particularly like GIs and that kind of stuff, that will just fall right free of the rifle. As a, for instance, I got a heavily used Ranger-plated magazine, and just paying attention to the difference between the two, this will catch on the mag catch a little bit, but it'll still glide on past it. And if you're pressing on the magazine release itself, it just kind of does whatever it wants. It doesn't stick or stop or do any of that crap. And, of course, it falls right out. So, and that's with the magazine actually pretty clean. When we start getting, in this, like just in the rain and that kind of stuff, and when we start, running the guns hard, when we start dealing with outer elements and that kind of shit, just kind of count on stripping them out of your gun. So that's one quality of life decrease. Is that a game stopper? No. Here's another little thing. You ever load, like for instance, like a PMag or a Lancer or a GI magazine, and it's been kind of used, right? Like it's been used a little bit, and you're sitting there and you're stuffing a magazine, and you get to 30 and you're pushing a 31st one in there, and you feel it roll really hard and squish into it. And it's like, I'm overloaded. You strip that one, and now you're back down to 30 rounds so you don't bend feed lips and do crazy shit like that, right? Post round about like 10, that's how every round feels going into these magazines right here. It's just a very squish kind of feeling to it. Anytime that you load a magazine, pretty much around about like post round number 10, all of them are squishing in there. And look, this isn't that big of a deal until it turns into an annoyance, right? Like if you're out, you're training, you're sitting there loading your magazines, you've stopped to load your magazines for the billionth time that day because you're just doing a lot of shooting and all that other crap. And it's just every round you load into these things, it turns itself into a chore. So that's a little bit of a quality of life decrease. Again, is it really that big of a deal? It's really not that big of a deal. It starts to become a tremendous pain in the ass actually when it's cold, because your thumbs are just over it at a certain point. You know what I mean? So, really not that crazy. The one that actually legitimately bothers me is, like, I've stuck these in pouches and that kind of stuff before, and so have students, because students have used these too. I stuck these in pouches and I leave them for a little while. I go to load and that kind of stuff, and then I notice, the next magazine that replaces that just later in the day, right? Like I'm just going through magazines, my empty ones are sitting aside, and I'm putting loaded ones in pouches. I've noticed on quite a few occasions, the magazine that follows this guy, I contact something hard, and I look, and I'm like, what the hell? And I notice that there's a couple of rounds just floating about in that pouch. I'm not a giant fan of having my magazines becoming a 28 or a 26 rounder inadvertently. You guys know that I like to keep that. I like to make sure that I can seat a magazine on a closed bolt. So, I'll load it all the way until it stops and strip 2 out of there just to make sure whether or not it's a 30, a 31, or a 32. It turns into a 30, 29, or 28, right? So if I lose a couple of rounds between here and over there, which is not a lot of time. Like, if I'm just, like, the most is that I'll sit there and I'll go over a block of what it is that we're going to do, talk about a bunch of different stuff, answer questions, and then we go to the demo, and then we go do other stuff. And then I notice that a couple of rounds have ejected themselves into the pouch. So, losing a couple of rounds in it involuntarily from the thing that's supposed to hold my bullets and feed my rifle, not my pouches, is sort of a pain in the ass. But the bottom line is that if I stuck a loaded one of these into my rifle, I know it's going to feed it because we haven't had any feeding troubles, which is very pleasant. Okay, because I didn't want to come out here and say, that an American-made company is, dropping the ball or whatever, right? I'm just telling you what I've experienced. Now, bottom line, they're going to work. They're in my inventory, and I'll keep using them. But because you have, PMags, Lancers, and GIs, which is like pretty much everything that I run in my bag, which is behind this camera here, I don't really see a reason to go over to these, really. I mean, GI, Lancer, and PMags are all pretty affordable. They're all pretty light. They all do their job really, really well, And I don't have those, and I don't get quality of life decreases a little in little increments here and there. So I'm not a giant fan of these magazines. I'm just going to be perfectly honest. Now again, I'm going to stress this. Did they work in my rifle? Yeah. Yeah, they did. Am I going to trust them for much more than, like, teaching classes and that kind of stuff? No, I'm not. The ammo that is holding the Mark 262 and that's in the home defense rifle that's in my house, there's still a Lancer feeding that rifle, or a GI, or a PMag, depending on what's going on with that rifle that particular day. So I'm not going to go out of my way to go get them. But it's not a tire fire, you know what I mean? So that's what I got to say on these. Now, you'll notice that I don't have their Glock magazines on my person. And that's because they're sitting in a tree line someplace. Those are terrible. They do not work very well at all. Okay, there's a couple of things that I'm not a fan of, aside of the fact that after just a little bit of like this kind of crap, they just shut down completely. Number one, there isn't a metal skirt in them, and the way that follower and spring design is, and the way that Glocks just tend to be, you can't really pull an HK USP and have a not metal-lined magazine, especially with the fact that it seems that the polymer that they have for their magazines, like their molds, they're kind of soft, right? So if it's kind of soft, and you don't have a metal lining to reinforce all that stuff, or at the very least to keep a lot of the squishiness from happening, you're going to run into a lot of issues. And of course, we ran into a lot of issues. And I'm not the only person that ran into them either. I remember going to Paisley, Florida, and we had a guy show up with a bunch of them, and they just didn't work. Like, and to be fair, in Florida, the sugar sand kills everything, but really good equipment like factory Glock magazines and CCP-10C magazines and that other shit, that was beginning to shut down too. It was barely functional. Like, we're trundling along, we're constantly, running up punch-through magazines and that kind of stuff. We're constantly making sure that there's a bowl of water available so that guys can just, like, thread out their shit, and then they go back to the hotel room, gut their guns, and then they come back, and it just kind of limps along. But that's really good equipment. The Glock magazines from M2 didn't make it through the first few hours of the first day. Much like, honestly, much like the Magpul Glock magazines, which if you introduced them to a place like that, or if you go to the Nevada desert, for instance, we had a bunch of those shut down in Nevada while we were out there doing our pistol class. That's just how it goes, So I'm not very impressed by them. When also really, it kind of burns my ass on them just a little bit, is on the magazine floor plates themselves. I got a Glock magazine in there some places buried. They chose enormous floor plates to seat against, like, stock handguns, so it covers that whole underside up. Number one, they're huge. It's like a giant shoe, right? It's just hanging out of there, which means if I'm carrying concealed and I'm sitting there going 10,000 miles an hour and I'm really stripping for handguns and that kind of stuff, you can run into an issue to where this isn't so bad right here, right? Because it's got a little bit of a lip on it. But when it's huge, like the magazines that they have, it's really hard for your clothing to not want to hook that stuff. Okay? So the issue that I run into is, I just tighten my magazine pouches a little bit on these to just make sure that my clothing doesn't catch them and yank them out of pouches and that kind of shit. And they were never an issue really to start. With the big-ass floor plates that M2 uses on their Glock magazines, I've seen them come out 1,000 times. And it's not just concealed gear, it's on, like, belts and that kind of stuff, too. When guys are moving really fast and they're just trying to get to equipment, or they're in really goofy-ass positions and they're rolling on the ground, that kind of shit. I've seen those magazines come out 1,000 times because they get snagged on slings. When they're concealed, they get snagged on shirts, all kinds of shit. So it's a giant snag point. That needs to go away. And the other thing that burns my ass about it is the simple fact that because the floor plate is fucking huge, a lot of guys are running around with actually a really good product from Magpul, the magazine well, like the concealed carry magazine well that Magpul put out for the Glock. It's actually a really good product that works really good. But the problem is that if you're using magazine wells and you have giant toes on magazines, they're not going to fit. Sort of an issue. Now, I will say this. I didn't get the chance to really see that myself, mostly because they sent me, like, Glock 17 magazines, and I fuck about with the 19, so there's a little bit of an extension there. Somebody tell me in the comment section below if you have, like, an everyday, like an EDC magazine well that you use for your Glock 19, and you try to buy these magazines and they won't fit. If they do fit, I'm going to take back everything that I just said, right? But the thing is that I can't really go too terribly far on my review process when after their first couple of days with us, or the first class that they go to where they're really getting used versus a little bit of, like, dry weather and, really pleasant conditions and that kind of shit. Okay, it works when it's nice out, but the minute it gets a little crappy outside, they absolutely shut down when it takes, like P10C magazines, Glock 19 magazines, that kind of stuff. It takes significantly longer for them to start limping along. So when I see a Men 2 magazine shut all the way the fuck down on, like, drill 4, we got a problem. You see what I'm saying? So if there's something that I'm gonna go ahead and buy from them, it's their rifle magazines. For the pistol magazines, actually, and for the rifle magazines too, I personally believe that whatever they're using for polymer is too soft. They need to get a little bit more rigid in that polymer formula. because I understand wanting to flex and not wanting things to get brittle and crack and that kind of thing, which I totally understand. But at the same time, there's a fine balance between worrying me with how often your magazines squish when I load bullets into them, being soft enough to where, and this is what I believe is happening, the magazine bodies are soft enough to where they start to peel apart, and then when I'm walking around and jostling the magazine, it loses a round or two. I'm not okay with that. And as far as their pistol magazines are concerned, you guys need a metal insert, and the polymer needs to get harder. It's not going to work otherwise. A bunch of people have tried. All of them fail constantly. Okay. Because the ETS Glock magazines are a dumpster fire. Particularly if you put steel case target ammo in them. And guys that say don't run that ammo. Honestly, if my handgun doesn't run steel cased ammo, I'm not giving it anything else, because Tula runs just fine in an MP5 or a micro Uzi, and if the ammunition runs just fine in a submachine gun, my handgun should run it just fine, right? So ETS magazines are trash. Magpul Glock magazines, we watch them die every single time they come out to any class that we run. It doesn't really matter what it is, and frankly, most of the time, it doesn't matter how many that guy brought, okay? When he brings 2, 1 dies. When he brings 4, a bunch die. It's just how it goes. So the polymer magazines that are out there for Glocks that don't have the metal inserts in them, whether or not the polymer is rigid or not, that seems to be a big part of this, and it needs to get fixed. So, if a Men 2 is listening, I highly suggest that is just the case, that just gets fixed. We bite the bullet, we sell the unit. I understand, you have to sell a bunch of units and that kind of stuff in order to make the money to put into research and development and then improve your product. I got you. I totally do. You're still going to sell a bajillion magazines. You guys absolutely know how to Instagram. You're fine. What I am saying, though, is that if you want people to take you seriously, especially with the handgun magazines, that polymer formula needs to get more rigid, and there needs to be a metal skirt inside of that magazine, just like a factory Glock mag. And for God's sakes, get rid of that gaudy ass toe. It doesn't need to be there. It doesn't really serve a purpose. If you want a floor plate that you can release easily, okay, great, cool. But just keep the regular profile, because everybody runs off of that Glock magazine profile. And honestly, as far as just drawing from concealment, like appendix and that kind of stuff, I don't need to go for my handgun and have one of my magazines come out also. So delete the giant toe, make the polymer more rigid, throw a metal skirt in it, and even if this is a more expensive magazine, people will spend money on quality, especially psychos that train all the time religiously. Those are the people that you need to support, okay? Not the gun show fuds. So, all of that said, and I know I got really harsh on them just now, they seem like a company that's about doing better. They seem like a company that's about improving their products, and they seem like a company that doesn't want to go away because of quality issues, and they're going to constantly try and improve stuff until things get better. So, I wish them luck. I'm not going to count on them right now, but I wish them luck, and I hope that they start doing well, man. I mean, there are companies that are doing their best to improve as time goes on. Like, for instance, I'm paying very, very close attention to Palmetto State Armory AKs. They seem to be coming along pretty good. Somebody that's leading that department's got his head screwed on straight. So we'll see where those go. But, companies that are doing that kind of stuff are like X-Tech, that are constantly improving their products and that kind of shit too. I want to get behind and I want to support these people, but I'm also not going to pull punches. These will work, but I'm not going to go out of my way to get them. To me, they're too soft. They lose bullets. Glock magazines, try again. They're bad. They're bad, and they need serious reworking. So, that's all I got, guys. If you want to come out and train with us, you absolutely can. We still got a bunch of stuff on the schedule planned out to December. When the new fiscal year for the United States Army starts, that's when I'm going to start posting stuff again. My guys that joined us for, like, Nevada, Montana, the vehicle class that's coming up, the guys that are going out to Florida, Georgia, all these other fucking places. I'm getting to the point where I'm starting to discover people I'm going to have a hard time getting rid of, which is cool. you know, to have a base in these places. But with that said, thank you guys. Without your support, this wouldn't have graduated into the thing I wanted it to be from the start, and that was a company that I could start myself and run, right? Because I've always viewed myself as somebody that trains and also has a YouTube channel, right? I didn't want to just be a YouTube channel. So I appreciate everything that you guys have done. If you guys want to, you know, if you want to check out our website, come out and train with us. Link is in the description below. Same thing for our Facebook page, which is also in the link in the description below. I know I'm missing something, but that's pretty much it. Oh, by the way, if you want to support us on Patreon, you can absolutely do that. Come out and train with us, $41 a month, and you can train with us as much as you want to. Or if you just want to whip a little bit of something our way, it absolutely helps. It absolutely keeps the channel going and that kind of stuff. And I would not be where I am right now with the state of this company without you guys. So I appreciate everything that you're doing for me, keeping me the luckiest guy on the planet. You know, a dude that hasn't had a real job in years, and I don't intend to work for other people. So, thank you very much. I appreciate everything that you guys are doing yet again. And remember, a regular guy's firearm is the last defense against tyranny. Be easy.